You must have seen the video because every man, woman and their dog has responded to it. The video, reasonable questions for anti-SJWs.
Hello there. So as Noel Plum quite correctly points out, there have been quite a few responses to this particular video. Now, I'm not going to go through all those responses, and I'm certainly not going to go through all the responses to all of the questions. I'm going to focus on what I believe and I hope is a representative subset of the responses to my particular questions, though I will touch on responses to a couple of other questions which sort of are related to those I posed. What I want to point out, first of all, is I do think that this division between SJWs and anti-SJWs is problematic. It's a useful, sort of very gross distinction, very broad distinction to place different people into different camps. But of course, you know, it's difficult to label people like that, and it's very problematic. Similarly with left-wing and right-wing politics, I would place my politics left of centre, but when it comes to things like, I don't know, science funding, for example, I'm almost, but not quite, libertarian from some perspectives, in terms of, you know, science should be about free discovery, curiosity, etc., and tethering that to particular societal goals. Now, this might sound counterintuitive, may not be the best way to get to those societal goals. So, you know, it's difficult when you're placed in one particular camp. And the other thing I got for the tone I got from this is an awful lot of people took it very personally, which I found interesting, given that, again, it's meant to be the it's meant to be the SJW camp. That's the hypersensitive one. So, you know, the difficulty is I had certain people in mind, and perhaps that's unfair. I certainly wouldn't ever suggest that the types of criticism I was putting forward are universal. How could they be? How could they be universal to a particular group? There's a spectrum of opinions on both sides. What really impressed me about some of these responses was the willingness for people to engage. Not all the time, but in many cases there was a willingness to engage. And okay, I don't really care if my questions have been misinterpreted a little bit. That's partly my fault. Largely my fault. As long as it seeded some discussion, and it seeded some discussion. And that's great. A number of the responses, they were intelligent, perceptive, really made me think, put across in a very steady, calm manner, and really were, you know, quite probing and very engaging and quite fun, I would say, almost to watch. Then there were other examples.
I can tell that you think you're a really smart guy. I'm here to tell you the opposite. You're a stupid motherfucker. I'm a smart guy. Remember that shit. Fuck you. Eat shit and die.
Don't worry, Mr. Kirk. This isn't a question of taking you out of context, so I think you'd probably agree that I'm not really taking you out of context there. That was pretty much the overall context of your comments. I'll get back to you. Don't worry. Bear with me. You might want to scroll forward a little bit to check out where I do engage with you later on. So before we get to the more histrionic responses, I'm going to focus on a few more of those rather more level-headed and intelligent responses. So let's continue with the person that's kicked off the video, Noel Plum. I'm going to address some of Noel's points. He makes some very, very good points, and yeah, let's see what he says.
The words like cook, mangina, beta male, the kind of trashy, non-impact words that it's just schoolyard crap, right? That isn't acceptable.
Indeed, Noel, it isn't acceptable. And I realise I've just cut you off there. I will play the rest of that clip so we can just put that in context, because you were very careful to put things in context, and it's good to see. So I really don't want to be accused of taking you out of context. But you're absolutely right. It is playground. But when people were actually addressing the question I asked about the shitposting on one side and the rationals and the logics on the other, you claim to be proponents of rational, logical, evidence-based argumentation. That's great. that's entirely laudable. But when I look at your online activity, when I look at, I don't know, for example, your Twitter feed, that's often not what I see. How do you reconcile this claim to be evidence-based and rational and logical against stuff like, oh, I was just trolling you, oh, I was just shitposting, or TLDR? The argument was, well, you know, we can do both. Yes, you can do both, but don't conflate the two. That's the point I was making. Yes, you can have your identity over here and your identity over here, but it's when you conflate those two, when there's a debate happening, when there's an argument happening, and you resort to the playground. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen on both sides. I'm not saying it doesn't happen on both sides. But the argument continually comes, I guess because some of this is spreading from what was an atheist community, I guess, if we must use the community term. The argument comes that we're rational, this is logical, those SJWs aren't rational.
The kind of trashy, non-impact words that it's just schoolyard crap, right? That isn't acceptable. But using words like racist and sexist to smear somebody's entire subscriber base, the kind of words that have tangible impact, that get people sacked from their jobs, that's okay, is it? That's all right to use that kind of language.
No, well, you describe these things as these words as having no impact. Here's an example where there's a major impact. And, you know, I'm grey of beard and long in the tooth and wizened of hair and etc., etc. I'm old enough to remember time before the internet. My kids, however, it's absolutely clear that for them, their sort of online life and their real life, if we must put it in those terms, are conflated. So the idea that something over here, you can, in terms of the online activity, you can just switch off. For me, yeah, that's fine. Probably for you, Noel, as well. I don't know. I don't know if we're quite of the same vintage. We might be. That's something we can switch off from. Not for our kids, right? And so the idea that these things have no impact, and you know, we've discussed this by email, is something that I think we both agree is not the case. That it's much more nuanced than that, and that these, you know, slagging off people and abusing people online can have real world impacts, as this particular article, very recent article, shows. And I'll provide the link to that down there as well. So, you know, the idea that it's just words on the page, words on the screen, just words, those words can have impact. And what's particularly galling, and I will come back to this, what's particularly galling is not the use of pseudonyms per se. I have absolutely no problem with the use of pseudonyms and avatars. Never had. It's not so much the avatar itself that's the problem. Where the problem is, and where the rank hypocrisy is if somebody hiding behind that avatar to throw out abuse and to slag off others while simultaneously complaining that those people are delicate flowers, precious snowflakes, etc.
In a world where everyone is attacking one another because reasons, I emerge triumphant as the internet's hall monitor.
See, this is one of the great things about doing these videos. I'd never found out about Jeans. I hope that's how you pronounce your name. Really hope so. Jeans. Gines. At least I can spell it correctly, maybe, if I don't pronounce it correctly. I'd never found out about your channel without doing this questions video. I really enjoyed your video. So let's have a look at what you had to say.
Because it's Twitter. And Twitter is only 140 characters. And shit posting is rampant there.
Okay, so this is a common response to this particular question, and as I said, I was trying to get representative responses instead of you know, address every single question and have a 42-hour long video or whatever.
If someone right now was like, oh, she seems like a very smart activist, I am going to check out her Twitter, the first thing they will see is, what if butts had boobs?
The question has come back because it's Twitter, but note what I say. I say when I check out your online activity, for example, Twitter. Twitter is but one example, okay? Yes, it's 140 characters. I used to have a Twitter account and I killed my Twitter account because that 140 character format is pretty well custom built to get you to descend to the playground very, very quickly. And I'm an argumentative sod and I'm a tenacious sod, and it was tying up far too much of my time. So I killed my Twitter account. I agree entirely. But again, it boils down to this. Your argument is, oh, well, we can separate these two things. That's fine. If those two things are separated in terms of the logic and rational reason and evidence-based argument on this side and the Twitter shit posting or whatever on this side, it's when those two things are conflated. And that happens a lot. You can say it doesn't, but it does. And indeed, in terms of online activity, it wasn't just about Twitter. So I had a particular example in mind. I'll give you that example. And again, maybe this doesn't go with the whole generalised anti-SJW versus generalised SJW, but as I've said, I don't think that's a particularly powerful argument or a particularly useful position to adopt in any case. There are particular examples in each one of these things. For example, I don't think it's particularly reasonable or reasoned or logical or evidence-based to, for example, have on your channel an intro video which tells us all about how you're desperate to reintroduce logic and reason back into argumentation, and it's a shame that that's lacking out there. And then to post a video, for example, where you ring up your mommy, depending on which region of the world you're from, which country you're from, and tell her what you didn't tell an MP about rape. To film that and upload it.
Recording a quick thing for Twitter, just to let you know, right, there's a feminist MP called Jess Phillips, and I wouldn't rape her. I will never rape her. I wouldn't rape her. I will never rape her.
What's that about?
Now that is, you're trying to make an argument there which is not relying on reason, debate and evidence. It's relying on a petty, immature stunt. The other example I had in mind was that of Philip Mason, aka Thunderfoot. The number of subscribers, any of those numbers, any of those metrics, what have they got to do with the argument?
Makes total difference. I actually hate when people bring up the number of followers.
In the same time span that he lost 79 subscribers, I gained 38,000. My message has resonated with people for nearly a decade now. And while I'm never going to be the next fucking PewDiePie who gets 38,000 subscribers every time he fucking scratches his asshole, I'm very happy with my channel's growth. I don't bring this up just to brag, though, although bragging is a fringe benefit.
If someone honestly thinks they are better than you or that their voice resonates more because they have more subscribers, then all you gotta do is just laugh and keep presenting your point.
I hate when I'm on Twitter and I respond to something and they're like, well, you have 90k followers. Why do you care so much about what I think? And it's like, I just want to freaking talk to you. Why does it matter? I hate it.
In terms of kind of truth value, in terms of some philosophical or scientific sense, then I agree with everything you have to say. It bears no relationship whatsoever. It doesn't matter how many subs you've got to the strength of your argument. That's some kind of a argument from appeal to popularity or something like that, and it doesn't make any sense.
Thank you, Noel. That's exactly the point. It doesn't matter how many subs you have, how many dislikes you have, how many likes you have, to the strength of the argument. And then to conflate that with the argument that, well, because I'm more popular, my message resonates more. I don't see that at all. Yes, your message resonates more. Does that particularly mean that it's a message to which everyone should subscribe? Christianity resonates quite a bit. Islam resonates quite a bit. Should we really, because those resonate so widely, does that mean that that's extra evidence for us to subscribe to those particular views?
But there are other kinds of win, right? You can have a scientific or a philosophical win, but you can also have a political win. And I perhaps this is the perfect time to bring this up because, of course, there is the presidential election in the United States with this series of debates. And if you look at how the commentators, or the political commenters, I should say, talk about this, they talk about these different levels of win. They talk about who's won the argument, but when they talk about who's won the debate, they also look at that in terms of the political impact and who is going to gain percentage of voters from this and who isn't. And that isn't necessarily who provides the best argument. It can be based on lots and lots of other factors.
Noel, I agree entirely. Absolutely, that you've got, you know, the rational and the logical arguments on one side, and then you've got something which is a hell of a lot more subjective, and you're appealing to the masses. Where my problems lie is that if people are upfront and say, well, you know, it's not really all about rational and logic, it's about speaking to hearts rather than minds, if we must use that cliche. That's fine. But for somebody who claims to be rational and logical, to then claim that, well, my message resonates and that's got nothing to do with the quality of my arguments, that it's purely sort of a political aspect of this, that's not a compelling argument. That's a very hypocritical argument. So let's put if we're going to say, we're going to put the claims to be rational and logical to one side, fine. Let's just do that. Let's not be hypocritical about it.
Is that what we're talking about isn't just social justice, we're talking about social justice warriorism. And this is surely an important factor of being an SJW, is the fact that you have this warriorism. Surely if there is any purpose to social justice warriorism, it is about a hearts and minds campaign.
You know what, Noel, this is a really good point, but I'm not entirely convinced that it's just restricted to one side of this. You know, I would argue that those on the, if we must use that term, anti-SJW side, feel that they are sort of the minority, that they are entrenched in this particular position and that they are trying to win people over to their cause as well. That's how I see it. Very happy to debate this, but I don't see the distinction between warriorism on one side and not warriorism on the other, particularly given what we've just discussed in terms of hearts versus minds. It's not on this anti-SJW side, on that side of the barrier, that end of the spectrum. It's not about, we've seen, it's not about solely rational and logical arguments. It's also about speaking to this.
But if you have those motivations as an SJW, and I think it's those motivations are one of the factors that define somebody as an SJW. If you don't have that warriorism mentality, that mentality to go out there and preach your social justice position, then I wouldn't define you as an SJW in the first place. So in that context, I think it's actually a very, very valid factor.
When I say preaching, if I look at TJ Kirk, that's preaching. That's the closest thing to televangelism I think I've seen, coming from a self-avowed atheist. That's an incredibly dramatic, incredibly powerful. He's all over the place. He's putting it across so emotively. In some ways, I respect that. It strikes me as very odd that people who go, it's all about the reason, it's all about the logic, got to put emotion to one side. And then you look at TJ Kirk for just a few minutes, and that man's full of passion. And actually, despite the fact that he's called me stupid, and what did he say? He can eat shit and die. I think that's what it was, TJ. Was it eat shit and die? I think so. Anyway, despite the fact that resonates with me. That passion, I think, is a good thing. Particularly even when it comes to science. You know, if I'm doing an experiment at 4 o'clock in the morning and I see something that nobody else in the world, or perhaps nobody else in the universe has ever seen before, am I going to go, ho hum, another experimental result, great? No, absolutely not. I'm going to fucking jump around the lab in sort of pure unbridled joy. And so the idea that scientists are just these, absolutely dispassionate automatons is just nonsense. And similarly, this idea of just rational and logical, etc., is just, when I look at TJ Kirk and others like him, that's not what I see at all. Really isn't what I see at all. So I would argue he's just as big a warrior.
If you're talking about the influence YouTubers have when they're like more famous because they have a lot of followers, and I don't know, I didn't try, and I don't tell people what they want to hear. I've made videos where I make fun of conservatives, and a lot of people didn't like it, and they left, and I'm like, okay, bye. Well, this is me. Deal with it. I don't know.
I really applaud you for that. Great comment, and really applaud your stance on this, that you have the courage of your convictions, you stand behind what you say, you put your views out there. If people like them, great. If people don't like them, tough. You don't play to the gallery, and you don't do this for views, or you don't do this for the money generated by views. Immensely laudable.
Well, do you think first wave feminism would have been as successful if they never changed any hearts and minds? Do you think that any idea has ever gone on to transform a society without the majority first adopting it? I think the importance of popularity is kind of fucking self-evident. But does being more popular mean you're more correct? Well, of course it doesn't. Your number of followers says nothing about the quality of your arguments.
No, but that doesn't address the point, Mr. Kirk. The point here is very clear. We have one camp, if we must use those terms, which is claiming that their arguments are rational, evidence-based and logical. Now, if that isn't the case, fine, let's put that to bed. Let's forget about that, and let's just accept that in both camps, the arguments are sometimes rather more emotional and less grounded in rationality and logic. And sometimes in both camps, there are appeals to the heart rather than the mind. Agreed? It's just a question of being honest and open, and let's leave the hypocrisy to one side.
Luckily, I happen to make good arguments, and so do most of the other big anti-SJW vloggers.
Okay, fine. That's I'm sure we can stand back and see how objective and logical and rational a position that is. Thank you for making me smile, TJ. I hope you don't mind me calling you TJ. I'm Philip, by the way.
Well, I'm TJ Kirk, and this is my face. See? So I'm not hiding behind shit.
Well done. Delighted to see it, though I believe that you weren't quite always as keen to reveal your identity. Might be wrong there. But anyway, glad that you're doing it now. Maybe you can encourage more to do that. Maybe you can point out to those who leave tons of abusive comments and vitriol and bile under videos, complaining about others being delicate flowers while they cravenly hide behind an avatar and a pseudonym. Maybe you can explain to them that they should follow your example and go, this is my face, this is who I am, I'm standing behind my arguments, I'm having the courage of my convictions, instead of tearing into others for being delicate flowers when they lack the courage of their convictions and can't even put their name or their face to their slurs.
But don't you think this question is kind of ironic when at least two of the people asking questions in your video are hiding behind cartoons?
For me at least, I can't speak for the others, but for me at least there's a key difference here. There's a universe of difference in somebody using an avatar and a pseudonym to post comments and to be reasonable, and somebody else using an avatar and a pseudonym as a shield behind which to hide so they can fire off torrents of abuse, all the while complaining about others being delicate flowers or precious snowflakes. That for me is the key difference. It is beyond hypocritical, rank hypocrisy to complain about others being delicate flowers while all the while someone is cowering behind safety, their nice cozy safe space, if we must call it that, of anonymity. That's the difference.
Speaking of Thunderfoot, he's done an exemplary job on his channel tearing apart the bullshit studies that feminists prop up. And he's actually the one checking their sources and looking at their citations. So it's your side that puts forth shit studies and expects them to just be unquestioned. It's not ours.
I've mentioned before, and I'll mention again, I've had an exchange with Philip Mason. I've asked him to provide evidence to back up claims that he made about sexual dimorphism and its role in determining the gender balance in physics. And the response I've had is,
fuck it, I'll just troll the guy. And it got really quite comical towards the end, to the point where he was writing like pages and pages of text, and I was just like, bleh, on the keyboard.
I think and I hope that if you put all your vitriol and bile to one side and you calm down a little, TJ, just a little, you might appreciate that that's perhaps not the most rational and logical argument. Okay?
I don't think I've ever even cited a scientific paper in my anti-feminism videos. I mean, maybe I have, But if I have, then you'd have to attack the veracity of that paper specifically.
Yes, and you'd also have to consider that paper, as I say elsewhere in my comments, in the context of the wider literature on that subject. Cherry picking an individual study, pulling out a few lines from that study, dear me, if that's all that we had to do for science, there'd be, people wouldn't have to work for 4 and 5 years on a PhD. People wouldn't have to work that hard to demonstrate new knowledge. It has to be put in context. Just cherry picking one paper on one section of a paper is not how we do research. It's not how we do science in any discipline.
You can't just make this generalization of, you guys are always putting forth shitty papers. Oh.
I didn't make that generalization. I agree that unfortunately it's within the context of an anti-SJW versus SJW argument, but I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that every time there are very weak arguments and that people aren't justifying on either side their positions. However, I have got demonstrable evidence of a number of occasions where either no evidence is forthcoming from those who claim to be rational and logical, or it's absolutely clear that studies have been cherry-picked and pulled out of all context.
And by the way, I can tell that you think you're a really smart guy.
How can you tell this, TJ? Have you got that mind-reading telepathy machine working that I've been working on for years? Really? What do you mean, how can you tell? I work in a department with exceptionally smart people. There are people here who are much better physicists, much better mathematicians than I am. I don't think myself smart in any way at all.
I'm here to tell you the opposite. You're a stupid motherfucker. I'm a smart guy. Remember that shit. Fuck you. Eat shit and die.
Rational, evidence-based, logical, coherent, free of emotion. As a supporter, as a proponent of freedom of speech, why do you want to quash academic freedom?
Okay, I think you're once again confused about the side you're on. To me, with my stupid fucking idiot brain, the side who uses bully tactics and intimidation tactics to keep certain speech off of campuses is the side against academic freedom.
No. Here's what I'm talking about. Many people have signed this from who would consider themselves the anti-SJW side. This is in direct contradiction of academic freedom. And before you make the argument it's all about the facts, it's about the facts, that's a really ridiculous way to think about university teaching. What are the facts? For example, I'm a physicist. Let's couch it in terms of quantum physics. There are many interpretations of quantum physics. There are empirical data and empirical evidence, and then there are interpretations of that evidence and data. To argue that we're only going to teach the facts would mean if we apply that logic across all university courses, you'd shut down quite a few quantum mechanics courses. You'd shut down string theory courses. You'd shut down quite a few physics courses which are at the edge of understanding the universe, because those are interpretations of data. Moreover, who is going to police this? Who is going to shut down these courses, or who is going to consider these courses? People that, for example, Mr. Benjamin has cherry-picked, or people that agree with Mr. Benjamin, or people from across all sides, and how exactly is it going to work? That's what I have in mind. It's the hypocrisy and the contradictions inherent in a position whereby somebody who claims to be a proponent of freedom of speech is basically acting against academic freedom. That's what I have in mind.
To me, with my stupid fucking idiot brain,
I've never called you stupid once, TJ. Particularly, you're addressing this directly at me. I've never once called you stupid. I've criticised your points, but you should be able to take that criticism with a little bit more maturity than this.
the side who uses bully tactics and intimidation tactics to keep certain speech off of campuses is the side against academic freedom.
I'm not a fan at all of no platforming. I believe that a university should be about free speech and free debate. And actually, I'm in the process of trying to organise a workshop on this, this very issue in terms of freedom of speech, academic freedom, no platforming, the whole YouTube online debates, the SJW versus... I'm trying to do that, to bring that, to show people what universities really are about. Yes, there are isolated examples of where it goes wrong. I'm not saying there aren't. But again, stop generalising. And I know I'm doing that in the context. I know you're taking this exceptionally personally, Mr. Kirk, for which I can't really apologise, because that's you're taking it personally. There's not much I can do about that.
You apparently feel differently, so I can only assume that you come from fucking opposite world, and that's why everything you're saying is so completely fucking backwards.
There's a complete and utter inconsistency in being a proponent of freedom of speech and then arguing that certain courses have to be shut down. You yourself made this point, and you made it extremely well to Carl Benjamin. You pointed out the utter inconsistency. You, of all people, to be critical of me in suggesting this is quite remarkable. You actually made this point. You made it very well.
So I can only assume that you come from fucking opposite world.
As I said, TJ, you made this point yourself. So maybe we're both living in backwards world. Actually, backwards world is an interesting one. In terms of quantum mechanics, again, time and how we treat time in quantum mechanics, fascinating subject. By the way, could you just stop shouting, just maybe for a little bit? Thank you. You do realise that you're as much of a social justice warrior as those you critique. It's just that you espouse a different form of social justice, a rather less considerate, rather less forgiving, rather less kind form of social justice.
That's a good point. But I will say, if we are going to reduce things to calling them out and saying it's not kind, it's this and that, then I think we're just turning into a bunch of kids in the schoolyard saying, you pushed me first. No, you did. No, you did. Slap, slap, slap fight, you know.
No, Jeans, there's a difference. Again, there's a spectrum. There's a big difference between being very hypersensitive to criticisms.
You're a stupid motherfucker. I'm a smart guy. Remember that shit. Fuck you. Eat shit and die.
Pretty hypersensitive, I would say. That's really, really sensitive. And perhaps not the most compelling or convincing of arguments. On the other hand, here's an article that I recently read, which really, really upset me. And if people out there think by saying that this really upset me and I was really affected by this, and they think that's some degree of virtue signal, there's one of the problems there. I think if we are going to draw a dividing line, somebody who would argue that being really concerned about somebody or really affected by somebody committing suicide due to online abuse is virtue signalling, maybe that's a dividing line. And it's about care, as I said, about care and consideration for others. And that's what I was alluding to. And again, that can happen on both sides. As you say later on, we shouldn't demonize each other.
We're done with slap fights. Are we not done with slap fights? Can we just fucking talk? Are we ready to do that, guys? I feel like we are. I really do. I feel like we're on the cusp of fucking talking.
I'd really like to think we are done with slap fights. I've certainly, as I said, very much been engaged by your responses, by Noel Plum's, by others' responses, and then other responses have been rather weaker and more confrontational and less helpful. So I think we've got a way to go, but I think there's, as you say, I think we're beginning to see a gradual evolution, to echo Noel Plum, towards at least some engagement. Let's put it that way.
I will now leave you with a couple suggestions on how perhaps the alt-right and the alt-left can actually fucking have a conversation. Number one, alt-right people, don't forget that these SJW folks that you like to demonize, they are people too. They may just be abstract concepts to you that are over the internet, but don't forget they're actual people and they have actual feelings. Instead of perhaps jutting in with your own commentary every 2 seconds, perhaps let their commentaries breathe and see what they're actually saying and listen and absorb for just a second, just to see where they're coming from. Just try to do that.
So this is great advice on either side. It really is. And, you know, it's such a breath of fresh air to hear you say this. It's, you know, we're both guilty of overheated exchanges were both guilty of getting emotional, both sides, if we must have divided up like that. So this is great advice. Thank you.
I believe those who lean left really base their opinions more so on feelings than I think the alt-right does.
Now that's a very big sweeping generalization, Jeans. I'm a physicist. I spend my life looking for evidence. I spend my life thinking in a very analytical way. However, there is a divide between being able to treat a problem scientifically and on an evidence-based argument and issues that are more moral and ethical. So, for example, I'll give you an example. A claim that, for example, sexual dimorphism underpins the gender balance in physics, to use one that I've debated at length in the past, it's a scientific claim. That's something we can look at with evidence. We can see if the evidence is there to support it. Agreed? Right? And that's something that I've spent a lot of time looking into. I'm, as I say, a physicist, but I'm also an admissions tutor, which means I look at applications from students to do our courses here. So that's something that's of keen interest to me. On the other hand, my position that to send anybody, let alone a victim of sexual abuse, but to send anybody a tweet or a message or an email or whatever that reads, "I wouldn't even rape you," is the action of an odious turd of a man. That's a moral, it's an ethical stance, and there are many out there who may not agree. But that, to argue that a person who has a different moral or ethical framework is necessarily basing that on more emotional aspects and less scientific aspects, I really don't see that. Most of my colleagues here, again, are on that left-leaning side of the spectrum. In terms of their political views, most of my physicists and astrophysicists and theoretical physicist colleagues, and that's not just here in Nottingham, it's in very many other universities. Now you might ask why that type of balance exists or whatever, but it's rather a sweeping generalization to suggest that those who have got left-leaning views have got those left-leaning views because they don't think analytically or scientifically. That's not something that is a particularly useful generalization, and particularly for those of us who are scientists, yeah, that rankles a little bit. Having said that, I'm still enjoying what you're saying.
So just remember that both of you guys have similarities within one another, and to talk about those, and if there is a problem, then you got to get a nice moderator to come and help moderate some debates. Someone who's objective as fuck and really, really pretty and really nice and cute to moderate your debates. I'm here to help you do that because I am the internet hall monitor, apparently.
Very, very happy to have you moderate any debate, James. Thank you for the suggestion, and I'm sure there are many out there who'd be more than happy to have you moderate debates on both sides.